In this video, I invite you to join me as I take you inside iconic First Growth Bordeaux producer Chateau Latour and share what I learned during a recent visit to this legendary estate. We'll start out in the vineyard, where I show you highlights from a tour of the most prestigious portion of Latour's vineyards and show you the prized old vines and special soils in that vineyard. After that, we'll go inside the chateau and I'll show you the winemaking facilities, including some special treats like a private look inside the historic wine library that houses many large format bottles dating all the way back to 1900. Of course, these highlights will also include a discussion of what I learned regarding Latour's approach to grape growing and winemaking. I'll discuss each of the 3 different wines that Latour produces, including one that can be purchased for as little as $90 to $95 per bottle. After that, I'll discuss my buying strategies for Chateau Latour, and this is undoubtedly an ideal time to be purchasing Latour. Wouldn't it be nice if you could go back in time and purchase legendary wines like the 61 and 82 Latour for the current release prices? Well, you essentially have that opportunity now, as 2 of the releases from Latour in the past 10 years or so rival the quality of those legendary wines and are available for a fraction of the price of those epic vintages. Well, I've toured hundreds of vineyards around the world. It was a special, almost surreal experience to walk the historic Latour vineyard. You just got a feeling that there was something very, very special and magical about the place. This experience very much reminded me of the same feeling that I get when I'm touring a top art museum and see a historic work of art, such as the Mona Lisa in the Louvre. Except this was way better because there were no crowds and I was able to enjoy it largely in peace and quiet. Latour has 92 hectares of vines, but it's the 47-hectare parcel surrounding the chateau that is called the Enclos that separates Latour from other world-class producers. In fact, many consider the Enclos to be the very best terroir in all of Bordeaux. Only the fruit from the special old vines grown in the Enclos, which average an impressive 60 years of age, is even considered to be included in the top wine. The Enclos features ideal conditions for consistently producing world-class Cabernet Sauvignon, which is significant because the Latour top wine frequently includes 90% or more of Cabernet Sauvignon in the blend. What makes this vineyard so special? Well, there's several things going on here. First, it's located very close to the Gironde estuary, which helps to moderate temperatures and insulate this vineyard from some of the extreme weather that can be experienced in other parts of Bordeaux. Latour also has a number of slopes in its vineyards with varying soils, aspects, and sun exposure. These variations help to create parcels of fruit with different flavor profiles that, when blended together, creates wines of great complexity. While there's an abundance of rocky soils with excellent drainage that are well suited to Cabernet Sauvignon, there's also some marly clay subsoils that retain water and help to ensure that the roots can penetrate deeply and gain access to water, thereby preventing some of the problems associated with severe heat stress during times of drought. Of course, Latour also uses meticulous farming methods in its vineyards. Each of its vineyards is divided up on a plot-by-plot basis. They assign a dedicated employee, many of which have worked there for many years, to farm each particular parcel. When I was there, I saw several employees working their respective areas. Latour has used 100% organic farming methods since the 2015 vintage, and currently 60 of the 92 hectares of Latour vines are also farmed biodynamically, including 100% of the Enclos. Following the vineyard tour, we went inside and toured the winemaking facilities. Of course, Latour uses a very strict selection of fruit. Only around 35% or so of the harvest makes it into the top wine. Interestingly, however, unlike many top producers, Latour does not embrace optical sorting. Latour has been doing some experiments with optical sorting and may use it to a greater extent in the future, but much like Chateau Margaux, they seem a bit skeptical of it, and certainly historically and to this point, they're relying primarily on manual sorting. Latour has a state-of-the-art winemaking facility. They have a control panel that allows them to control all aspects of fermentation with great precision, including the temperature in the stainless steel tanks, as well as the frequency, number, and duration of pump overs, and so forth. Following fermentation, the wine goes into barrel and then will go into one of two barrel rooms, one for first-year wines and another for second-year wines. While I was there, for example, I saw the 2023 vintage in the first-year wine barrel room and the 2022 vintage in the second-year wine barrel room. Latour wants to ensure high-quality production methods for as much of the production process as possible, so they recently completed their own bottling line, and now all Chateau Latour wines are bottled by Chateau Latour at the estate. Once the wine is bottled, it goes into a separate, massive room for additional bottle aging before release. Since Latour has not participated in the Entremort or Bordeaux Futures program since at least the 2012 vintage, this means that they have to store a massive amount of their production at the chateau before it's released. While I was there, they had more than 1 million bottles in this room, and you really can't appreciate the magnitude and size of this room until you're standing in it. Other than the tasting, of course, one of the highlights of the visit to Chateau Latour was seeing a special private cellar that Latour uses to house some of its large formats that date all the way back to 1900. And I was told that after harvest, they open one of these special bottles to help commemorate the occasion. Before I get into the buying strategies for Chateau Latour, I'll briefly discuss each of the 3 different wines Chateau Latour produces. Of course, the most famous wine produced by Chateau Latour is Chateau Latour. This wine was classified as a first growth in the 1855 classification of Bordeaux, and it's absolutely one of the best wines in the entire world. As mentioned, the fruit for this wine has to come exclusively from the Enclos, which is the most prestigious parcel and where the vines average an impressive 60 years of age. This wine matures in 100% new French oak for around 18 months before it's bottled. This wine is a blend, but it's a blend that's dominated by Cabernet Sauvignon, which oftentimes makes up around 90% or more of the blend, and Merlot typically makes up the rest. There are some vintages where they'll include a small percentage of Petit Verdot, but they no longer use much Cabernet Franc at all in any of their wines. If you have not yet tried Chateau Latour, it should definitely be on your bucket list. Latour is all about power, intensity, concentration, and purity of fruit. Latour is capable of aging effortlessly for decades, particularly in strong vintages. Latour becomes truly exceptional with extended bottle aging after the tannins have become fully integrated, the wine becomes seamless, and it has substantial tertiary complexity. If you can wait long enough for that to happen, or if you can find a bottle that's already fully mature, then you're likely to become a Latour believer. The second wine produced by Chateau Latour is Les Forts de Latour. This is a name that was first used in 1966, but this wine has only been produced every single vintage beginning with the 1990 vintage. This is a world-class wine in its own right, and if there were a reclassification today, this wine would probably be a third growth. The fruit for Les Forts de Latour comes from 3 primary sources. First, there's the vines that are in the Enclos that are at least 12 years old, but which are not old enough to be considered for the top wine. Second, there's fruit from the Enclos that does not make it into the top wine, either because it comes from an area such as the outer edges of the Enclos, or otherwise because the winemaking team believed that the fruit should not go into the top wine, perhaps after a tasting assessment. Lastly, the third component of fruit is fruit that comes from other vineyard sources that are owned by Latour and have been acquired over the years, but which are in an area that is not considered part of the Enclos. Latour uses largely the very same winemaking techniques to produce Les Forts de Latour as it does the top wine, with 2 primary exceptions. First, rather than using 100% new French oak, Les Forts de Latour matures for 18 months in 50 to 60% new French oak, depending on the vintage. Second, there's a much higher Merlot percentage in Les Forts de Latour, oftentimes 25 to 35%. For example, the outstanding 2019 vintage is the current release of Les Forts de Latour, and that wine consists of 66% Cabernet Sauvignon, 32% Merlot, and 2% Petit Verdot. I tasted the 2019 vintage of Les Forts de Latour when I was at the winery, and I was extremely impressed. This is a highly acclaimed wine that you can find selling for around $175 to $225 per bottle, depending on the format size and also the quantity that you purchase. This is also an extremely age-worthy wine, and it's definitely one you want to put away for at least 8 to 10 years before you start digging in. For example, when I was at the winery, they told me that they recently opened the 2001 vintage and that it was still showing extremely well. So this is definitely a wine that you can mature for at least 20 years or so with no difficulty at all. Le Poyaka de Chateau Latour is another wine that's produced by Chateau Latour. This is a wine that's been produced every vintage since 1989. This wine was initially produced for the restaurant market. Le Poyaka de Chateau Latour oftentimes is produced using around 25% of the harvest. This fruit consists largely of the less heralded portions of the enclos, such as the outer edges, as well as the fruit that does not make it into Les Forts de Latour. This wine matures in 20% New French oak for around 18 months or so, and there's a very high percentage of Merlot in this wine. The 2020 vintage consists of 53% Merlot, 43% Cabernet Sauvignon, and 4% Petit Verdot. This wine, too, benefits from at least 2 to 3 additional years of bottle age, and you can enjoy this one up to 12 years after the vintage. I found this wine selling for as little as $90 to $95 per bottle in the United States, and it's definitely a wine that I would not hesitate to purchase. I was extremely impressed with this wine when I tasted it at the winery. Now it's time for me to review my buying strategy for Chateau Latour, including the 2 vintages that are among the very best that Latour has ever produced and which will ultimately rival epic vintages like 1961 and 1982. If you're interested in wine recommendations, wine collecting strategies, and learning more about wine, please do subscribe to my channel. I've been collecting wine for more than 15 years and also have a level 4 diploma from the WSET. So I have both formal certification as well as substantial practical knowledge from the School of Hard Knocks. As mentioned, Latour no longer sells its wines in the wine futures market. Instead, it matures them at the winery until it deems them ready to release. Latour believed that the 2017 vintage was ready to release before the 2016 vintage, and so Latour released the 2017 vintage last year, and it was only in March of 2025 that Latour finally released the 2016 vintage. I had a chance to taste the 2016 Latour when I visited the winery back in December of 2024, several months before it was released, and it was an extremely memorable wine. In fact, it's hard to imagine that a wine could be any more perfect than the 2016 Latour. To be clear, that does not mean that I would open this bottle and enjoy it anytime soon. Rather, this wine has a very, very long life ahead of it, and I would probably put this one away for at least 2 decades or so, and even longer if I had the time and ability to do so. But when it comes to evaluating and scoring a wine, it's hard for me to imagine that a wine could score any more highly with this one. And certainly the critics who have evaluated this wine seem to agree, as it has accrued at least 5 100-point scores that I'm aware of. This wine certainly reminds me of extremely strong Latour vintages such as 2000 and 2010. Along with the 2016 vintage, 2010 is another one that's considered to be one of the very best vintages of Latour ever produced, along with vintages like 1961 and 1982. That vintage is selling for around $1,200 per bottle right now in the secondary market, and I have no doubts that the 2016 vintage will be selling for close to that price before too long. The 2016 Latour was released at $700 per bottle, but it's already been selling extremely well, and the price has been creeping up steadily ever since. While the 2000 vintage may be just a tick below vintages like 2010 and 2016, it's also received some perfect scores, and it's a phenomenal wine in its own right. Better still, that one sells for a little bit less than $1,000 most places, and so I would not hesitate to buy that wine as well, especially because it already has a lot more aging on it than either of these other 2 vintages. I think that the absolute best quality for the price for a Latour right now is absolutely the 1996 vintage, which is showing extremely well and I'd gladly drink any day of the week, but which sells for much less than some of these other vintages. I also very much enjoy the 2001 vintage, which I think is also showing quite well now. In addition, I've also had pretty good success enjoying some Latour wines from vintages that are good but not great, and which have extended bottle age on them. For example, I've enjoyed vintages like 1971, 1983, and 1988 in the last couple of years, and all definitely exceeded expectations. These wines are extremely age-worthy, and they're also capable of exceeding your expectations for the general quality of the vintage. While I generally do not recommend buying off-vintage wines on this channel, Latour may be a bit of an exception to that, as Latour has such tremendous terroir that they're capable of making enjoyable, quality wines even in challenging vintages in Bordeaux. If you're a fan of Bordeaux like I am, please check out the links in the description below, as I publish more than 60 different videos about Bordeaux. If you enjoyed this video, and you'd like to hear my thoughts regarding my visit to Chateau Margaux, please be sure to check out this video that's linked above.